What can you say about the kind of board members we have? They are the real talent in this organization, and the oversight they provide is outstanding, and we're really very grateful to have somebody who champions us the way Eric does. So thank you very much, Eric. I'm going to take you through a journey about and introduce to you what we're all about, and then take you through and start to talk about what we're trying to do in terms of the task that Eric has mentioned, and that is looking at our 2050 targets. So bear with me with that. So as an outline, just talk a little bit about our approach to advance Alberta's priorities, the changing face of energy that we all are hearing about, and then how do we get to a balanced portfolio in 2050? And of course, in this regard, you're going to help us very much throughout the day. So just to say that our approach is very much about advancing government priorities, providing innovation leadership, you'll see that in the next slide, accessing market intelligence. Surinder Singh, one of our key executive directors, will be talking a little bit about that. Engaging partners, you'll hear that all day today. Building the capacity, working with our universities, working with our other research providers to build the capacity that we need for the energy and environmental industries. Transferring knowledge, Surinder will touch on that as well. And then ensuring transparent operations. So if you look at the business plan on a page that we have with you, you will see at the bottom our value statements, and the value statements are not changing. These are the values that we as an organization have committed to, and that is what defines our operations and the transparency of these operations. I should say that we have a very systematic approach to come up to the kind of targets that we have, but also to look at the kinds of priorities this province needs. We look at where are the gaps and try to focus on the solutions rather than only the problems. We'll take the problems and try to make them into solutions. So this is just a cartoon showing you that we have a systems approach to get to the priorities that we have. So the priority says, and I don't really expect you to read this, but to make sure that you know that we are focused on some major areas. We have some emerging areas that we look at, and watching brief. So this is our bullseye diagram, which we use to assess whether we are advancing in the province's interest in innovation in energy and environment. But just to be a little bit clearer, you can see I'm not sure I can point here, but in any case, you can see that we are a matrix organization. We will be talking about our strategic areas. Those are the ones in the middle. Of course, I'm pointing here at the screen and you can't see me pointing, but so these areas here are strategic areas, and you will hear from our executive directors in each of these areas talking about their strategic areas. But as a matrix organization, we are actually focused on targets or themes, if you like, target themes related to GHG emission reductions, to production and value added, and water and land. And so when you look at our targets, it is based on these themes. So people working in each of these areas are actually seconded to work on each of the target areas. So you'll see that as the day progresses. Just to say that we have developed 2030 targets. We've been developing targets where we identify the kind of initiatives we undertake as an organization to make sure that the initiatives we undertake are actually helping us achieve these targets as an organization. And these are the 2030 targets, again, in the theme areas of greenhouse gas emission reductions, production and value added, and water and land. And I want you to be able to judge for yourself based on some of the things that you'll be hearing today, whether we have the right initiatives that will get us to achieve the so-called targets. So we'll hear from Mark Bohm from Suncor Energy that he'll be talking about electromagnetic heating with solvent injection and the field project that we're involved in. Vicky will be talking about water treatment efficiency in SAGD, and that's related to one of these targets. And then Mark Summers will be looking at greening the electricity system, and again, it's related to this target. And then we have the low carbon innovation panel that we'll be looking at essentially with the idea that it's partnerships that help us support the kind of targets that we want to achieve. So that's really related to the greenhouse gas and emission reduction. Finally, on the production and value added, we have Maureen Kola that will be addressing the whole issues of the pathways that we need to achieve a landfill-free Alberta. And then the dynamic duo of Nevin Simolai and Shunlan Liu will be taking us through competitiveness of bitumen-derived crudes and the whole area of partial upgrading. Sometimes we don't have a target, but we have something that's urgent and is needed to be worked on. And we undertake to do this in a very rapid way, and John Zhao is going to tell you a little bit about the action we undertook, a very quick and rapid action to make sure that social acceptance of related to pipeline safety. In the innovation program, we have it's a program that's originated with the Alberta Energy Research Institute. We've got Brett Purdy talking to you about that program, and you'll see that in both of the targets that are highlighted here. And finally, we've got Bruce Beattie from EKS, who will be talking about the whole area of electrical treatment, a promising technology for tailings. Tailings will just not go away, unfortunately, but that can be done in situ or in place so you don't have to transport the tailings. And that will be the story of the day. So these are essentially our 2030 target, but as I mentioned, the board has tasked us with developing longer-term target to 2050, and of course you're going to be helping us in doing that. When I thought about it, I thought that perhaps we needed something to cheer us up, and I've chosen this particular song. Not many of you would have been around when this was done. Of course, this is Bob Dylan. So this is just to get you into the mood of change that is happening.
If your time to you is worth saving, then you better start swimming or you'll sink like a stone, for the times they are changing.
Well, the times were changing in 1964 when this song was done, but they're changing a lot faster today than ever before, and we need to be cognizant of that. The big change, in my view, in energy innovation is happening as we speak, the 21st century innovation, and it's happening in two important areas. One is wind and solar. By that I mean renewable energy. Many countries in the world today are counting on renewable energy, and wind and solar especially, to get to the targets, the ambitious targets they've set for themselves. On the other hand, we've had a revolution in oil and gas, started with the oil sands, in my view, at the turn of the century, and now with unconventional fracking, both gas and oil. So we've got huge amount of resource that has been turned into reserve due to new technology that's been developed in this century. And we've gone from, in the last 5 years, from being, for example, in peak oil, we talked about peak oil, we talked about natural gas going through the roof, to being in the area of peak demand. We now have much more supply than we have demand. So if you look at OECD countries, you can see the demand is increasing. The demand is dropping, and we've peaked in demand, and there is a decline that's happening in the need for fossil fuel use in developed countries. On the other hand, in developing countries, demand is growing. We see this especially in coal, because coal is cheap, and in many of the Asian countries and the Far East, the growth in especially coal, but also oil and gas. And climate scientists have been telling us that we need to stay below 2 degrees C and 450 ppm by 2050. Otherwise, all hell will break loose in terms of climate. And what that implies is that we have to leave 75% of the oil in the ground. But we have a very complex energy system, and it takes a long lead time for change to take place. So you can see what we have happening. And then finally, there is an after oil movement. I should say it's basically try to shut down the use of fossil fuels altogether. The question then becomes, what happens to our standard of living? Are we talking about a very different type of world that we live in, and especially a new world order, and then it's no longer the same standard of living? Maybe there is now what is known as a happiness index, and maybe that kind of changes the situation as well. So we're living, in my view, in two parallel worlds. You have the world on the left-hand side and the world on the right-hand side. And the only thing that connects these two worlds is, I think, innovation and technology. Recognizing that innovation is an uncertain process, but there is no other bet that we can have. And if we want to be able to understand and live in the world of no fossil fuels and the world of plentiful fossil fuels, it is really innovation that's going to connect the two worlds. So part of the work that you're going to be asked to do is to look forward to 2050 and look at the how do we develop a balanced portfolio, but looking at the 2030 focus that we have currently, and be able to advise us as to whether this is going to be fit for purpose for 2050. And in the end, in terms of 2050, just some suggested areas. We're talking about the idea of using the products of CO2. This is what the X Prize is all about, the CCMC Grand Challenge is all about, but also non-combustion uses for oil and gas in terms of structural materials and carbon fiber. And this is just some thoughts to get you thinking about what needs to be done. And then, of course, are we talking about being engaged in nuclear fusion? Are we looking at small modular reactors and any other ideas that you have? So this is essentially what we are going to be asking you to do. So this is really the outcomes report that you have on your desk. And before I introduced Vicky, who will be coming up next to give us a talk, I wanted to just to make sure that you were aware of the expert panel report on energy use and climate change. This morning at 8 a.m. Ottawa time, this report has been released, and so I'm able to give it to you. They waited until after the federal election to do that, it is an incredible. I was part of the panel to do this report. It's really important that we remain engaged in this whole area of energy use, and climate change is a difficult subject, and I think you will find the report quite valuable. With that, let me introduce to you Vicky. Vicky, again, as Eric mentioned, was the Young Woman in Energy Award, got the Young Woman in Energy Award, and we're very, very proud of her. So Vicky, come up to the podium.